Her voice was like a gift from the heavens, pure, powerful, and capable of reaching straight into the soul. Whitney Houston was born into the arms of music, and from the very beginning, it seemed she had been chosen by it. Her world was filled with gospel, soul, and hymns. Icons like Aretha Franklin, whom Whitney lovingly called Auntie, and Dionne Warwick, her first cousin, were frequent guests in her home. Her mother, Cissy Houston, sang in the church choir and became not just her guiding star, but her very first teacher. The church was where young Whitney found her first stage, a place where she could sing with all her heart, loudly, fearlessly, and with complete honesty. It was there she first realized that music could be a form of prayer, that a voice could be a bridge to something greater than the world around her. But her path to fame was anything but easy. In the early 1980s, her name meant nothing in the industry. She sang, recorded demo tapes, kept trying, but her efforts seemed to vanish into the void of the music business. Until one night changed everything. A music producer happened to hear her sing and immediately called his boss, legendary Clive Davis of Arista Records. "You need to hear her," he said. "This is not just a singer. This is destiny." Clive Davis came to see her perform. That evening, something electric was in the air. It was as if the stage itself knew something extraordinary was about to happen. And it did. At the end of the show, Davis approached her and offered a record deal. That was the beginning of what seemed to be a fairy tale, but one that would later turn tragic. Her debut album was explosive. It sold millions of copies and delivered hit after hit. Songs that are still sung today at weddings, parties, and even alone, by a window with a glass of wine. But even in those triumphant moments, Houston faced battles. As a black artist, she encountered invisible but deeply rooted barriers. When she submitted one of her music videos to MTV, the network refused to play it, calling it off-brand. But her rising fame became unstoppable, and even MTV had to give in and air her videos. In the studio, she worked with the best in the industry, including Jermaine Jackson, brother of the legendary Michael Jackson. Between them, something more than just artistic chemistry began to grow. It was love. But it was forbidden. Jermaine was married. Their relationship remained hidden, stolen in time, filled with hope and heartbreak. When he ultimately chose not to leave his family, Whitney was left shattered. Yet once again, she poured her pain into music. The resulting album broke records, and awards followed one after another, as if fate itself was trying to console her. Behind the spotlight, however, lived a different story. A woman struggling with loneliness, the crushing pressure of fame, and the constant roar of tabloid gossip. Her life became a target, a spectacle for scandal-hungry headlines. Few understood the toll it took for her to step on stage, to smile for the cameras, to keep going. Then came that fateful day. She was only 48. The world was stunned, but some knew more. Just hours before her death, Whitney called her longtime friend and assistant, Mary Jones. She confessed that her heart was broken, that she was tired. Those words now echo with heavy finality, like a farewell wrapped in sorrow. Whitney Houston did not just sing. She lived every note. She bared her soul and gave us a piece of herself. Her voice remains with us, not just as music, but as a reminder of how powerful, fragile, and beautiful a human being can be. At one point, she was on top of the world, a dazzling star with a voice that seemed to descend from the heavens, a face known to anyone who had ever turned on a radio or a TV. Then, just as suddenly, she became the subject of whispers, speculation, and ruthless headlines that stripped away her privacy and her peace. Whitney Houston didn't just sing. She lived every note as though her entire soul were riding on it. But fame, as always, came with a price. The tabloids were relentless. They scrutinized not only her career, but her silences, her friendships, her very heart. Rumors swirled around her close bond with Robyn Crawford, her confidant, her companion, the quiet presence who was always by her side. Others speculated about a deeper connection with Eddie Murphy. Were they more than just friends? Neither of them confirmed anything. In fact, they seemed to relish the media guessing game. On her 26th birthday, Murphy gave her a 5.5-carat diamond ring. In interviews, Whitney would call him a friend, and then, with a mischievous smile, joke about their dates. Everything remained suspended in mystery, until it didn't. Then her love life became public, and a new story began. Her second album soared through the charts once again. But with greater success came harsher criticism. Some fans and critics accused her of abandoning her roots, of selling out. That tension reached its peak at the Soul Train Awards in 1989. When her name was announced, a chorus of boos echoed through the hall. Whitney stood radiant, but the sound of rejection cut deep. That night, however, she met Bobby Brown. And perhaps it was that very wound that made her open to something entirely new. Brown came into her life like a storm, charismatic, reckless, magnetic, and complicated. At just 22, he carried a chaotic past. Gang ties, gunfire, fatherless children. He was unpredictable, intense, and far from available. When he and Whitney began dating, his former partner Kim Ward, the mother of one of his children, was already pregnant with another. She learned about the engagement the same way the public did, through the announcement. The wedding approached. Just a day before, Eddie Murphy reappeared, this time with a plea. He called Whitney and urged her to stop, to reconsider. Was it jealousy? A gut instinct? No one knows. Whitney quietly hung up the phone and walked down the aisle. To the world, it looked like a fairy tale, the elegant diva and the charming bad boy. But behind the scenes, cracks were already forming. In his memoir, Brown later revealed that on the morning of their wedding, he found Whitney using drugs in her dressing room. That was only the beginning. Their marriage would be fiery, dramatic, and haunted by shadows on both sides. Still, Whitney kept rising. Her star blazed anew when she was offered the lead role in The Bodyguard. It was a bold opportunity and a risk. Hollywood wasn't sure if a black singer could carry a romantic storyline opposite Kevin Costner. There was even talk of cutting her from the trailer. But Whitney refused to back down. The film became a blockbuster. Her on-screen presence, powerful, vulnerable, luminous, was its beating heart. And the soundtrack became a cultural phenomenon. Especially one song that changed everything. I Will Always Love You. Dolly Parton, who had written it, didn't even know her song had been chosen. One day, she turned on the radio and heard Whitney's voice. Time stopped. It was one of the most emotional moments of my life, Parton would later say. Whitney's version shattered records and expectations. It became an anthem of love, of loss, of longing. It felt as if she had poured every ache, every hope, every fragile truth into it. Her fears, her dreams, her soul. And so, with a voice like an angel and a wound she carried quietly, Whitney Houston remained in our hearts forever. Not just as a singer, but as a woman who felt everything too deeply. In the early 90s, Whitney Houston seemed untouchable. A radiant star whose fame only grew with each performance and every new song. The 1992 release of The Bodyguard became a cultural phenomenon, and her soul-stirring rendition of I Will Always Love You marked a turning point in pop music history. Millions admired her voice, her beauty, and the image of unshakable strength she projected to the world. But behind the spotlight, away from the adoring crowds, a quieter, more painful story was unfolding. During the filming of The Bodyguard, Whitney was expecting a child. It was her private joy, a silent miracle behind the blinding lights of the set. But tragedy struck. She suffered a miscarriage. Just one day later, she was back in front of the camera, singing, acting, smiling, as if nothing had happened. Years later, she would confess that this was one of the most painful roles she ever played, not on screen, but in life. It was during this time that Kevin Costner, her co-star, made a pivotal decision that forever shaped the film's iconic image. On the now famous movie poster where he's seen carrying a woman in his arms, that woman is not Whitney. It is a body double. Whitney needed time to recover, and Costner, wanting to capture the vulnerability and fear of her character, asked the stand-in to hide her face. Only her arms, the embrace, and the shadows remained. That was the image he chose for the poster. The film didn't just succeed. It propelled Whitney to even greater heights. She gained millions of new fans, shattered music sales records, and became a global icon. But at home, beyond the glare of success, her personal life was beginning to fracture. Bobby Brown, her husband, struggled with her fame. Though talented, he lacked the same level of recognition and influence. "Something happens to a man when a woman has more fame," Whitney once said, quietly acknowledging the shift. Their relationship grew strained. Brown was unfaithful, at times abusive, while Whitney masked her pain behind a practiced smile. And yet, amid the turmoil, there was one undeniable light in her life. In March of 1993, the couple welcomed their daughter, Bobbi Kristina. For Whitney, it was a long-awaited blessing. She had always dreamed of becoming a mother, and for a while, everything else faded into the background. But peace was fleeting. Almost immediately after the birth, preparations began for a world tour promoting The Bodyguard. It was massive and exhausting. The press scrutinized her every move, speculating about breakdowns, delays, even health issues. Whitney was being torn between roles: mother, performer, wife. During the tour, she became pregnant again. Hope returned. But only days later, she suffered another miscarriage. Her body was worn down, her spirit shattered. She canceled one concert, but soon, she was back on stage. Just as before, as though nothing had happened. Still, she refused to give up. In 1996, at the height of her fame, Whitney once again tried for motherhood. In an interview with People, she shared her deepest fear. "My greatest fear is losing another child and being told I can never get pregnant again." It was the confession of a woman exhausted by sorrow, yet still clinging to hope. Tragically, her fears came true. Another pregnancy ended in loss. This time, the heartbreak was compounded by the fear that it might be final. Behind the glamour and glitter stood a woman whose heart beat louder than the applause, yet broke more often in silence. Her voice reached the world, but her pain was hidden in whispers. Whitney Houston's story is not only one of immense talent, but also of a fragile soul fighting to survive in a world where pain often hides behind brilliance. By the late 1990s, Whitney Houston's life teetered on a fragile edge, a dazzling career on one side, and a deeply troubled personal life on the other. While she lit up the screen in The Preacher's Wife with grace and sincerity, behind the scenes she was weathering storms that only grew more intense. At the time, her husband Bobby Brown was making headlines less for his music and more for his growing string of controversies. One arrest followed another, culminating in a conviction for driving under the influence, a public unraveling that turned his name into tabloid fodder. Yet Whitney pressed on. In the midst of inner chaos, she returned to the studio, initially planning to record just a few tracks for a greatest hits album. But something deeper stirred within her, and she didn't stop. What emerged was My Love Is Your Love, a vibrant, mature album filled with warmth and inner strength. It marked a triumphant return, the last luminous moment before her world darkened. The supporting tour that began in 1999 signaled a downward spiral. Whitney began showing up late to performances, appearing drained and distant. Her behavior grew erratic. The media pounced with a vengeance. Rumors of addiction, reports of explosive fights with Bobby, hints of a destructive relationship. It all swirled into a storm from which she could no longer escape. Soon, the truth became impossible to hide. The press clung to every expression, every shadow on her face. Images of Whitney with hollow eyes and a drawn face became all too familiar. In 2003, something she had long denied came to light: domestic violence. A call to the police brought officers to their home, where they found Whitney injured. A bruised face, a split lip, and a haunting silence where arguments had raged just hours earlier. Bobby was charged with assault, but despite it all, the couple left court holding hands, as if the habit of staying together outweighed the pain. In 2005, their life became a reality show. Being Bobby Brown offered an unfiltered, raw glimpse into their day-to-day arguments, fatigue, substance use. Everything usually hidden behind closed doors was now broadcast for millions. On camera, Whitney seemed like a stranger to herself. When production for a second season began, she refused to participate. The show was canceled. Later, in a revealing interview with Oprah Winfrey, she called the series a train wreck that never should have aired. But the wounds within the family continued to bleed. Bobbi's sister, Tina Brown, leaked photos of Whitney's home to the press. They were devastating. Cigarette-strewn floors, spoiled food, chaos mirroring the singer's inner state. Tina claimed she did it to help, to shock Whitney into waking up. Years later, she admitted it was a mistake, one she deeply regretted. The world watched as one of its brightest stars crumbled in the public eye. Every scandal, every troubled photo became a headline. Yet through it all, Whitney and Bobbi insisted they were united, that they would survive it together. That's why, when Whitney filed for divorce in 2006, it stunned everyone. After years of clinging to the illusion, she let go. The divorce was finalized in 2007. Whitney was granted full custody of their daughter, Bobbi Kristina. So ended one of the most painful chapters of her life. It was more than a separation. It was a 10-year battle for her voice, her peace, and the right to choose light after so many years lost in the dark. In the early 2000s, it seemed as though Whitney Houston was ready to begin a new chapter of her life. There was a light in her eyes again, a glimmer of hope, as if something deep inside her had reignited. But sometimes, the road to rebirth can be far more difficult than the fall itself. In the year 2009, during a candid interview with Oprah Winfrey, Whitney opened her heart like never before. With trembling words and a voice edged with pain and strength, she spoke of the shadows that had haunted her for years. She admitted to struggling with addiction, at first subtle and barely noticeable, but eventually as constant and corrosive as breathing. She went through rehab, fought for her sobriety, one day at a time, one step at a time, like climbing a frozen mountain barefoot. But the temptations never truly let her go. There were relapses, new rounds of treatment, fleeting hopes, and then the exhausting battle all over again. Through it all, she tried to return to what had always been her true self, her music. The stage was her sanctuary from childhood. Under the spotlights, she seemed to find herself again. But even when her voice soared like it once had, a storm still raged within. She made it clear the healing process was far from over. Voluntarily, she entered rehab once more, still holding on to the belief that she could break free from the vicious cycle. But fate would not be kind. On February 11, 2012, in a room at the Beverly Hilton Hotel, Whitney was found unresponsive. Emergency crews fought to revive her for 20 agonizing minutes. But the miracle never came. She was only 48. The world stood still. Millions felt their hearts tighten in unison. Police immediately reported no signs of foul play. A month later, the autopsy confirmed what many feared. Her death was an accident, drowning, complicated by heart issues and the presence of substances. That very evening, she had been scheduled to attend a pre-Grammy party hosted by Clive Davis, the man who had first introduced her to the world. In a cruel twist of irony, the event was not canceled. The party continued, just floors below the room where her body still lay. Guests danced, drank, and laughed. Clive Davis faced intense criticism for his decision. Her ex-husband, Bobby Brown, was performing that night. On stage, he blew a kiss to the sky and whispered, "I love you, Whitney." His voice cracked, and the audience fell into a stunned silence. Her farewell was as grand as her life. Stars gathered to honor her, to sing for her, to cry for her. Kevin Costner, her co-star in The Bodyguard, gave a heartfelt eulogy, filled with raw emotion. Bobby Brown appeared briefly, but couldn't stay. Overwhelmed with grief, he left. In the final years of her life, there were rumors that Ray J, the younger brother of her friend and fellow singer Brandy, had been close to her. Witnesses said he was one of the first to reach the hotel room that tragic night. He was devastated. After her death, the media released photos from the scene. The bathtub where she passed away, wet towels, scattered belongings. remnants of her last room service meal. The images hit hard, especially for those who loved her not for the headlines, but for her voice. A voice that carried pure emotion, the very soul of music. For her daughter, Bobbi Kristina, the loss was a devastating blow. Her story is a different one, but no less filled with sorrow. Whitney Houston was more than a legendary singer. She was a woman who fought, who stumbled, and got back up again. A woman who longed to live, but walked too long on the edge. Her voice lives on, and behind that voice, her story. Raw, real, and heartbreakingly beautiful. Whitney Houston's life was marked by haunting parallels, reflections of pain, fame, and inner demons that would tragically echo in the fate of her only daughter, Bobbi Kristina. The same spotlight, the same heartbreak, the same silent battles. On the 31st of January, 2015, a chilling silence was broken in their home. Bobbi Kristina was found unresponsive, discovered by her friend and, according to rumors, romantic partner, Nick Gordon. Paramedics were called. There was a fight for her life, and there was hope, but that hope slowly faded. For 6 long months, she hovered between life and death. Then came the silence. On July 26th, her heart stopped. She was only 22. What happened to Bobbi Kristina felt like a tragic echo of her mother's story. And the further Whitney drifted from this world, the more secrets began to surface. One of them belonged to Robyn Crawford, Whitney's lifelong friend. In 2019, Robyn revealed the truth they had hidden for decades. They were more than just friends. There was love, intimacy, tenderness. But Whitney was afraid. In the world she inhabited, where every word could be twisted, every gesture scrutinized, there was no room for that kind of love. To protect her image and her career, she ended it. They remained just friends. But was it ever really just that? Then came a far darker revelation. In a 2018 documentary, several close friends and family members, including Whitney's half-brother and former manager, shared something long buried. Whitney had been sexually abused as a child. Her brother admitted he had been a victim too, by the same person. This trauma had been hidden for years, buried beneath layers of fame, chart-topping hits, and red carpet smiles. Whitney dreamed of peace, not the kind that comes with awards and applause, but an inner calm where she could simply exist as herself. Just hours before her death, she called her trusted assistant, Mary Jones, and quietly confessed. She wanted to change everything. She longed for peace. Someday, in heaven. Her journey was steeped in pain and struggle, yet it was also touched by brilliance. Whitney's voice, pure, powerful, and luminous, remains etched in the hearts of millions. Even in her darkest hours, that voice carried hope. She was not perfect, but she was real, and in that truth lies her greatness.